Hi everybody, Rin from Commonwealth Herbs here. We're going to do a quick health or hoax video, and today's topic is about ginger, and specifically about whether ginger can be helpful with nausea and vomiting during pregnancy. Now you might be thinking, Rin, come on, this is absurd. Of course, we already know the answer here. Lots of people work with ginger. They take it as tea or chewies or tinctures or other things, and they find it really helpful. This is widely known. It's a folk remedy that lots of people have already heard of, so what's the question here? Well, let me tell you. A little while ago, a study came out in the scientific journal Nature, and they were talking about the things that influence the severity of nausea during pregnancy. So this was a paper by Feso and Roca and Semino and others, and it was called GDF-15 linked to maternal risk of nausea and vomiting during pregnancy. It was actually published in 2023, but what they were saying in this study was, hey, we figured something out here. We found this hormone, and we found that it has a strong influence on the severity of nausea that people get during pregnancy. So what they found in this study was essentially that there's varying levels of exposure to this hormone, GDF-15, before pregnancy amongst different people. So some people are walking around, they have really low levels of that hormone at baseline. Other people, they're going around and they have elevated levels. There's even a health condition called beta thalassemia that can lead to very high levels of this before pregnancy. And what's been known for a long time is that people with that condition almost never have very serious nausea during pregnancy. Nobody really understood why until the study came out. And what they found was that this specific hormone is actually secreted at elevated levels by the placenta when there's a fetus in the uterus. And so what happens is, for almost everybody, during pregnancy, GDF-15 levels rise. Now, if your levels were already high before pregnancy, that change isn't very big, and the result is that you don't get a lot of nausea and vomiting. But for people who had low levels before pregnancy, then they get pregnant, they make the placenta, right? Now they're producing more GDF-15, and that tracks directly with the severity of nausea and vomiting that they experience. So this was regarded as an interesting study, as something helpful to give some sense of why is there such variability from person to person during pregnancy with this particular symptom. Okay, so that's the background, and now here comes the health or hoax question, right? Because after that study got published and there was some reporting and some discussion about that in the internet, on social media, there was a particular post that I saw, and I'm just going to go ahead and read out the text of it to you, right? So this was a post on one of the social medias, and this person wrote, "To all the women told to buy bracelets and eat ginger, who had fewer kids than they wanted because they were so sick or had them further apart out of necessity and fear, you don't need me to tell you that you were right and the ginger people were wrong. But just in case," and then they link to a description, a popular news article about this particular study. And then the author of this social media goes on to say, "Please stop telling pregnant women to eat ginger and buy bracelets. You have no idea what they may be dealing with, and I can assure you that neither ginger nor bracelets will prevent someone from vomiting dozens of times a day." Whew. Okay, so let me say this first. I agree with the primary sentiment this person's expressing, that nausea and vomiting of pregnancy, and especially the really extreme form called hyperemesis gravidarum, those are really uncomfortable. They're terrible conditions to be living through, right? They can even put someone's health at really serious risk. So this is a big problem. It does require help. Let's make that clear up front. And then I also want to emphasize that this person is describing a situation where they're dealing with this health problem, right? Or they're talking to other people who have been, and they're like, well, I've been dealing with this for a while, and I've tried a bunch of different things, and they're hearing the same advice over and over again. They're talking to somebody different about their nausea and vomiting, and they're like, oh, have you tried ginger? Have you tried these acupressure bracelet things? And they get sick of hearing that same repeated suggestion over and over again. Totally get that. When you hear something 1,000 times, even if you've tried it and it wasn't helpful, then that gets frustrating, it gets annoying. And so we as herbalists, we do want to avoid that when we're offering suggestions to our clients and their friends, right? The bracelets, by the way, in this post that the person put up are about acupressure devices that are supposed to help reduce the feeling of nausea. There is actually some evidence that they work for certain forms, but there's variation in individual response to them, and also variation in effectiveness depending on the cause of the nausea, right? And that's true about ginger as well, right? So ginger isn't the final answer for all forms of nausea, for all people, forever, right? If you know anything about herbalism, you know that we wouldn't recommend ginger to everybody who has nausea. We wouldn't want to recommend ginger to someone, for instance, who has a lot of heat signs or has a really hot constitution, red in the face, sweats easily, agitated, lots of fiery energy in their body all the time. If they're feeling nauseous, I'm not going to give them a hot herb like ginger. I'm going to give them something cooling, something gentle like chamomile or peach or pear leaf. Those would be much more effective for that individual, right? So ginger isn't for everyone. And then it can also be the case that maybe ginger does help a person a little bit, but the severity of the problem is really intense. And so the improvement is minimal or it's hard to perceive. So those are all real situations that can occur. But none of that means that ginger isn't helpful at all, that ginger doesn't help anybody, right? Or that we should just write off all these recommendations to try ginger when people are feeling nausea during pregnancy, right? What I'm objecting to most strongly in this social media statement of stop telling people to try ginger is the implication that because we have some new information about one of the hormonal influences on the severity of nausea in pregnancy, that this means that those acupressure bracelets or anti-emetic herbs like ginger are now proven to be ineffective for the problem at hand. Those statements aren't really related at all. The fact that we have some new microscopic or hormonal information and the fact that people try ginger and they work with them, works for some people and not others, those aren't connected, right? So simply because we have some new data about these communications in your body involved in a problem, and as the scientists are most interested, we have new targets for drug development. That doesn't invalidate empirical observations, your direct experience of benefit from working with herbs. It doesn't invalidate traditional practices about working with herbs, right? But let's pretend for a moment that it actually did, just for sake of argument. What if it was the case that only agents or therapies or interventions that can act on that specific hormone, GDF15, only those things could relieve some of the nausea and vomiting during pregnancy? What if that was true? Well, if it was, we would have to take into account some other scientific data that we've got. So there was actually a study done back in 2020 by Farombi, Ajayi, Adelara, and maybe some others. And this was titled 6 Gingerol Delays Tumorigenesis in Benzoate, Pyrene, and Dextran Sulfate Sodium-Induced Colorectal Cancer in Mice. Okay, that doesn't sound very related, right? But what they found in that study, and they were looking at things that influence cancer development, right? But what they found was that this constituent found in ginger did decrease the concentrations of certain hormones, including GDF15. Aha! So what we found here is that even if it was the case that only something that acts on that specific hormone, GDF15, can relieve the nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, well, it turns out that there is something in ginger that can accomplish that. Hey, isn't that interesting? So let's just hold here for a moment and reiterate that we never, and in this case we don't, want to take a single mouse model study on one isolated constituent of ginger. We don't want to take that idea too far either. We don't want to go around and start claiming that this is the proof of ginger's efficacy that we've been waiting for all this time. We thought maybe it could help, but we weren't really sure. But now we have this mouse model study and it shows a decrease in levels of GDF15 in the mouse after they work with this extract of ginger, and we've finally proven that ginger can be helpful during nausea and vomiting. No, we didn't need this kind of proof, right? But it does kind of take the wind out of the sails of that claim that nothing but a drug targeting GDF15 could ever make an impact on pregnancy-related nausea and vomiting. That is not a realistic claim to make. And so really what the point of this discussion in this little video here is to say that it's easy for us, especially in modern times, to look at new scientific information and say, this has the answers we've been looking for, this proves or disproves some idea that people have adopted from traditional medicine, and it turns out that that's not the case. It's not that simple. And oftentimes if we dig deeper, we're going to find some connection between the new thing and the old practice. And so I encourage you to build that into your thinking habits, into your research habits. whenever you're looking up data about herbs. And as for ginger in pregnancy, give it a try. See if it helps. If it does, great. If not, let's find something else that works for you. We can do it.